Okay, welcome again, everybody. Welcome to VCs at UCD, or Venture Capitalists at UC Davis. This is our weekly speaker series where we get a chance to hear from real-life venture investors, folks who have made a career investing in startups and trying to make better, bigger, and more awesome companies as they do so. It's my pleasure today to interview and introduce G. Radhakrishnan. She is an investor for Micron Ventures. Micron is a large corporate, so she works for a corporate venture group. I've known her for a few years now, a brilliant investor. I'm excited to introduce her. But before we begin, just a couple of notes about how we're gonna operate today. So it is pretty, we'll just call it open session. I'll be asking G a number of questions. If any of you have questions you'd like to ask along the way, please don't be bashful about raising your hand. Do it digitally or else I'm likely to miss you. So the digital hand raise function on Zoom, and we'll call on you as the conversation allows. But the goal here is to be conversational, to learn what you want to learn. So, you know, not every day you get to meet an excellent investor like G, so please take advantage of it. And we'll dive in. So G, thanks again for joining us. It's certainly a pleasure to have you here. Because we're with college students today, let's start early in your career. Can you tell us about your college experience, what you studied, where you went, and how that sort of opened the door for where you are today?
Sounds good. Thank you everyone for having me. And my undergrad degree, since we have ranged from undergrad all the way to PhD, I guess I'll cover all my educational backgrounds as well. My undergrad degree was in electronics and communication engineering. I did it in India, in engineering school in India. I came here to do my master's in electrical engineering at the Ohio State University. And then 3 years, something like that. Feels like ages ago. I did my MBA at INSEAD in France. So that's a quick gist of my background. I'll tell you quickly how it helps me in my current role. You know, I'm a technical investor. I'm not investing in B2C kind of companies. So having a technical sort of background helps me in terms of evaluating some of the deals that I look at, because I also look at deep tech. Micron's current fund is an AI fund. So we look at deep tech companies. So having the technical, at least background, definitely not the PhD level, but it definitely helps. And having sort of the business background helps in terms of evaluating financials and things like that. Just understanding business case, go to market, all of those aspects.
So G, did you start, so your undergrad you mentioned was kind of technical, and then you did this master's degree that was deeply technical, and then the MBA. So were those just back to back to back? And how did you decide to go from technical to business? You know, a lot of technical folks, they never leave that world. And those that do seem to leave it and forget it, but you've been able to straddle both. Tell us about that a little bit.
It's a good question. I think my first exposure to the business side actually luckily came with my very first role after my master's degree. I joined Corning in their fiber optics division in a kind of a role that would straddle both technology and business. So it's called market development engineer. And essentially what you did was you focused on standards development, focused on technical marketing and such. So I learned a lot about how it's not just about the product that you put out, but it's also about the story and the go-to-market in my very first role. There was a competitor whose product had been out there, but we were still able to beat them with our product, even though we were later to the market. So you always assume that, there's a, first mover advantage and such. So I realized that that's not always the case. Being kind of in that role, and then I transitioned to a startup doing product management and product marketing. Again, a lot more of the combination of technology and business, because when you're doing product management, you are sort of liaising between the customers and the engineering folks in terms of understanding what the market requirements are and turning those into product requirements. So and the product requirements then become your feed into your sprint cycles for your engineers. So it allowed me to, again, look at the world from both the lenses. And as I did more and more of this, I realized that I was quite fascinated about the business aspects, because even if you have an amazing technical product, and there are cases out there where the product may be great, but if you're not able to sell the right story, if your go-to-market is flawed, if your business model is flawed, you may not succeed in the market. So that prompted me to consider looking at a business degree. And frankly, my role at the startup, that was the first kind of direct exposure to VCs as well, because we were fundraising. At that time, this is back in 2003, 4 timeframe. It was kind of fascinating to see how VCs operated. It kind of felt like a black box. Who are these people? How do they know which startups are going to succeed, which is not going to succeed? Do they have some kind of magic 8-ball, right? So I was quite fascinated about how they decided what companies to invest in and not. So when I did my B school, I basically focused on entrepreneurship and venture capital as a result.
So a couple different questions I want to ask jumping off this, and I'm afraid they'll go in different directions. So I'll figure this out here. But so you spent time at a large corporate, like you mentioned Corning. You've done the startup world. What are the big differences as an employee working for these two different types of organizations? How are they similar? How are they different?
So they both have pros and cons. I'm kind of a startup person at heart, so I may flavor it more from that standpoint there. So a lot of processes and sort of structure in your thought process, you can get that by working in a large company. That's very important, especially as the company, as a startup is trying to grow and scale. In very early stages of a startup, everything is more haphazard because you're kind of on all cylinders, right? Whatever works, you're gonna do everything. But as you get to a certain growth stage, you want to be able to scale. You want to know what's driving certain things. So having processes can actually make it more seamless. So there are ways where the process can actually be an enabler and get more people on the same page. When you're going from 10 employees to like 50 employees, already you're 5x in terms of number of people. So the communication that you may have had when you're 10 people, it's just easier to get everyone in a room and get everyone on the same page. But when you're 50 people, it becomes a little harder. So understanding some of those processes to make sure that everyone's on the same page, I think corporate sort of like background and experience definitely helps you. On the flip side, corporates, everyone hears about this politics. There's also, everyone's in a box. You are expected to do this, and you can do more, but then you have to be careful about that you're not stepping on other people's toes, or if others shouldn't feel like you're encroaching into their territory or anything like that. There are ways to do it, and I have done it, and I'll talk about that too. So that is a big disadvantage. Whereas in a startup, everyone's goal is the success of the startup. No one's really, believe me when I say there's still politics in a startup, so it never goes away. But underlying, everyone wants the startup to be successful. So there is at least a unifying kind of North Star. So which also means that if you see there's an opportunity or a gap, it's up to you to jump in and fill that gap. You don't have to wait for permission. And I found that if you do a good job, you can elevate yourself pretty quickly in that environment because you're able to showcase your abilities much faster. It is also kind of a sink or swim. Not everyone's cut out for that kind of pressure, so to speak. There's always a go associated with startups, and that again, there's nothing good or bad. That just is not suited for everyone, right? So you need to understand what drives you and what motivates you. So that's another big difference between a startup and a corporate. I did mention that in a corporate, you're kind of stuck to your bucket or box. One way I've avoided it, and I've been in multiple big companies besides Corning. I also worked at Dell. One of the things I've done is I would set up one-on-one, and I would say, hey, I'm looking to learn this aspect. How can I help you? And now you can do it with their permission. They've identified gaps and they'll tell you what areas you can assist. So I've found ways to sort of, even in a large company like Dell with, tens of thousands of employees, to expand my scope beyond my box of, I used to do strategy and corp dev when I was at Dell. So I was able to do product management and product innovation, even though my title was strategy and corp dev in a large company like Dell. So there's always ways to do that. So you just need to find what fits your profile and what you enjoy.
Awesome. So, and I also want to, I'm fascinated by this transition, or maybe transition is the wrong word, but this adoption of a tech background and then expanding to business. So here at UC Davis, we have a ton of we'll call them tech first students, a lot of STEM students, many of whom I think, they feel a little bit of like imposter syndrome thinking about launching a startup, have almost no business background, something I can relate to as a social scientist. Degree good for maybe nothing at all. But so what advice would you give to a tech first student who is feeling anxious but wants to learn this business stuff?
Oh, there's no reason to be anxious, especially you're, so close to Silicon Valley, and you look at many of the startup founders who launched these amazing companies. They were all tech first. They were not necessarily business, and I hate to use the same old cliche folks, right? Like maybe Bill Gates. He was a hardcore technical guy, right? So you look at many of the leaders, but what's unique and interesting, I think, is to know, instead of thinking of that as a flaw or a gap, or find people who can help you in that journey, right? Find people. It doesn't have to be always a co-founder. Especially in the early stage when you're just trying to get a product in place, it can be, advisors. You can have business advisors. You can have mentors who can guide you to think through some of that. So just understand what your strengths are and try to find people and complement your skill set with the folks who can bring that complementary skill set to that table. And then when you get to a point where you actually have products and you need to take that to market, try to add people, focus on those business skills from a team development standpoint to build out and round out your teams.
I like that. So I love this idea of building a network, finding the mentors. One of the big challenges I think we face as students is that we're so early in our career, our mentor list is short. We haven't had a lot of business experience or tech experience to meet a lot of people. Any thoughts or advice on how to build your network as quickly as possible?
I have not done this, but I'm going to advise this anyway. In good schools with good technical programs like yours, a lot of the professors also work with corporates, right? So they have projects going with the corporates. You can work with those professors to understand, sort of ask for those relationships or ask for introduction, use them as guidance, right? And I wouldn't see why they would not be open to doing so. Frankly, also reach out to people and say, this is what I'm doing. This is my interest. I would love to get some time. Start developing those kind of relationships, asking. One thing, if I've learned anything in my career, is you will never get anything unless you ask for it. I mean, you can always wait for something to be given to you, but then you have to be okay with waiting. But there's no harm in asking. And the worst thing that'll happen is they may not respond or they may say no. So both of which you don't really lose anything by. So reaching out to somebody, even if it's on LinkedIn, and saying, but don't do blind, LinkedIn stuff. Be very specific. Keep your message very tailored. Tell them why you're reaching out to them, why them specifically. What do you expect? Are you just asking for 10, 15 minutes of their time or 30 minutes of their time? And always engage with a one time, and then you can decide how you want to take it forward. Because no one wants to sign up for a long term, let's meet every week kind of relationship without even meeting you, right? So reach out to them and say, this is your interest and this is what you're looking for. And if they would be open for a 30-minute conversation, that would be great. And I've found that most people are open to doing that. And if they're not, if they're busy at that time, they'll at least provide, some time later or give you some guidance. And another thing that I learned early in my career is when you do meet somebody like that and you've shared sort of what you're interested in, tell them, ask them if they'd be open to recommending you to, or like introducing you to, 2 or 3 other people based on your interests. So when I was much more eager to learn about product management, I used to do that. I'd meet somebody and I'd say, hey, I want to do more product management. Can you introduce me to 2 or 3 people in your network that you think I can benefit from by, and I'm happy to share whatever I can, but I'll also tell them I'll take no more than 30 minutes, similar to the same format as yours. So just ask that question every time. And it's a kind of a viral effect, right? Of every person you talk to, maybe you'll introduce you, if not to 2, at least 1 other person. So you kind of expand your network that way. You get to meet different people. You get to hear different stories and how they did what they did and what worked for them, what did not. So
awesome. Well, so let's transition a little further into your career now. So you went to INSEAD for your MBA. Tell us kind of what's happened since and where you've ended up.
I joke that my background is I've worked at large Fortune 500 companies, and then I've worked at startups. I've done, hands-on operational roles like product management, and then more non-operational roles like strategy and corp dev. But the underlying theme was, ever since I did my startup, I was very enamored by that ecosystem. So as I mentioned during INSEAD, I wanted to understand the venture and the entrepreneurial community better. And that's kind of where I focused my MBA on. And during my time at INSEAD, I actually interned at a VC firm in Germany called 3i, which is now a large private equity shop. It's a publicly listed private equity shop, but they used to have a venture arm back then. And post MBA, I ended up joining Earlybird Venture Capital, a top tier German venture fund, and worked with them for a couple of years. It gave me the opportunity to do a lot of early stage investing, which I really enjoyed. For personal reasons, we relocated to the US. And at that time, given my interest in the startup world and my interest in staying connected to that, I actually started working at a local startup accelerator in Austin, Texas. I moved back to US and I was in Austin, Texas at that time. I was with an accelerator called Tech Ranch. And then during that time, there were startups that would come to me and say, hey, such and such a big company is talking to me. Are they interested in buying me out or like partnering with me? What's their real intent and such? And those questions sort of made me think about the exit cycle for startups. I was at Earlybird for 2 years. I kind of missed the exit cycle. So I was thinking about how can I understand how large companies think about acquisition? And as you may know, a lot of the startup exit, a big chunk of the startup exits actually happen through acquisition or M&A as opposed to IPO. I know everyone hears about the big IPO stories, but if they're a lot bigger and more frequent is the M&A stories. So Austin is the home ground of Dell, and Dell was going through a massive acquisition spree. So I figured who better than to work at Dell in the strategy and corporate development side to understand that. So that's kind of what I did for about 5 years. I was involved, as I said earlier, in several skunkwork projects along with my strategy role for new product launches and things like that. So I could keep my startup sort of spirit, go get things done kind of in a smaller group there at Dell, in addition to my strategy and corp dev work. I was part of a software division, which grew through acquisition. We had revenues north of $2 billion. But when Dell decided to acquire EMC, they decided to spin out the software division to fund the EMC acquisition. I did not want to be part of a large private equity run shop. So I decided to leave Dell at that time. I joined the startup. Actually, I was VP of product at two different startups serially. One of them got acquired, another one went under. I took some time off and I decided to come back into venture. And here I am now at Micron, the corporate venture side this time.
Awesome. Well, so G, you left us with this little nugget of working for two startups post Dell, one that was acquired, one that went under. Tell us a little bit about the emotional highs of the acquisition, the emotional lows of the failure, and how you handled that.
So I have to be honest. So the acquisition happened after I left, because one of the company that did go under, someone that I'd really worked with before and had a high level of respect for, ended up becoming the CEO of the company that actually failed. It failed for various reasons. But at a certain point in your career, and you may realize this sooner as well, but I realized that, as I said, there's politics and everything else, right? But at the end of the day, what makes your life exciting and fun is the people that you work with and the people who will challenge you and from whom you'll learn the most. So my earlier startup that I was at, it was a great experience. It stretched me in different directions. But this particular person, when he joined the second startup that I alluded to as a CEO, reached out to me and said, would you be open to joining? The first time he asked, I'd not been with the company for even a year. So I said, it was too soon. I would love to, but it's too soon. And then 6 months later, he asked me again, by which time I think the previous company, I felt like I'd learned more than enough, and the opportunity to again learn from someone who used to be a SVP and GM at a company like EMC and HP, and also at Dell, and to work, be a part of his direct staff and learn from somebody like that was just tremendous opportunity that I didn't want to let go. So I made the switch. I still learned a lot, even though the company didn't succeed. So.
No, I love that idea of, everything's a chance to learn. Well, and so that got you to Micron. Tell us how you swung that job. Getting into the world of VC is not easy, although you clearly had plenty of experience in the past. But right. How did you get into Micron specifically? And maybe a little bit of advice more generally to folks who might be interested in being investors themselves someday.
So it's may not be a great story or answer, but I'll tell you the reality as it was. But specific to Micron, I think my husband's also a startup founder, and I had been working at startups as well. So it got to a point where I was thinking both of us sort of spending the kind of hours in a startup seemed a little crazy for our family. So I said, and given that he was the founder of his startup, he can't leave the company. So I said, I was exactly in between roles, and I thought about it, and I said, it'd be nice to be in a corporate, but I wanted to get back into VC as well. And I thought, having done institutional venture before, and having worked in a corporate and knowing how to navigate the corporate was a unique advantage that I could bring to bear. And another big trend these days that did not exist more than a decade ago when I was doing institutional venture was that corporate venture was not treated with a lot of respect more than a decade ago. They were thought of as tourists, not serious, just fly by. But what's since happened is that corporates are very active in the ecosystem and have continued to stay so. The reputation is changed, and a lot of traditional VCs take corporates as seriously as they would institutional VCs, as long as you operate the right way. There's always a sort of the right thing to do for the startup and for as a VC. As long as you follow by those, it's considered good. So given that I was thinking about this, I'd reached out to my contacts, one such being my current manager. He used to be at SanDisk and I knew him. It was a blind outreach. I didn't know that they were looking to hire. Turned out they were. it was also the right time at the right place, frankly, because I don't have a strong semiconductor experience in terms of work experience. I've done my semiconductor coursework in my undergrad and grad school, but I'd not really, and maybe a little bit at Corning, the fiber optic side, but I would say since then, not a whole lot. So my very first conversation in my interview, in the initial screen was, hey, if you're looking for someone who's a semiconductor expert, that's not me. And my current manager's response to that was, no, we have a company full of semiconductor experts, but what you're missing is someone who has the software expertise and the understanding of traditional venture. So kind of worked out from that standpoint, went through the typical interview process, and kind of here I am now.
Okay. Well, and how is corporate venture capital the same and different from, say, classic venture capital?
Great question. I think I won't say it's same. And the only reason I won't say that is it depends on what the corporate intentions are. You have firms like Qualcomm and Samsung and even Micron to some extent, where we have said we have first and foremost for the fund, it's financial return first. So we are looking at interesting cutting edge technology. So other ways, so in those cases, they're very similar to institutional, but there are even at Micron, we do what I call strategic investing. And that's when a business unit views a certain company or what they're doing to be of strategic value in terms of, partnership, understanding the immediate ecosystem and such, not necessarily from an acquisition intent, but more because the ability for us to expand our market or the ability for us to do something collaboratively, like a joint go-to-market opportunity, that drives strategic value to the company. The way that in such a case, the strategics may be different or corporate investors may be different is they may have specific requirements as a part of the investment. They may say, hey, I want certain, rights, like right of first refusal, because I'm putting all my resources, I'm putting enough resources to support you and like do joint development or go to market or something like that. And if you have a company, potentially even a competitor, come in and put a bid on you, and I lose all of that time, effort that we in the company has put in. Again, it's not something that always happens, but it can, where people may ask for that right of first refusal. What does right of first refusal or right of first notification mean? Right of first notification basically means that when, if that startup were to receive a bid from anyone, and here the corporate can get as specific as to name which companies they get the bid from for an acquisition, or they may just say any bid. They are required to notify the corporate that they've received a bid, and the corporate then has the chance to respond. And in the right of first refusal case, they can actually make a counteroffer. So that means they can effectively block the other one. So a lot of, in the past, a lot of institutional VCs would think of terms like that as not great for the startups because it limits their exit potential, right? It limits the opportunity for the company to exit. You want multiple parties bidding and increasing the price of the startup at the time of exit. Those terms, some of those terms are nowadays, you don't see them even with corporates, but there are things like that. Corporates can be slower, especially if it's strategic. Their process and the way they move may be different, not always the case. So there are some differences like that that are very unique to corporates that may or may not always be true. And so if you're ever getting money from a corporate, it's good to understand their process. How long do they expect to take between first meeting to close? What is their diligence process like and such?
Okay, awesome. Well, and so tell us about Micron specifically. What is your investment thesis? What kind of companies are you looking for?
Absolutely. So Micron, we have our investments fall under both categories. So I'll first talk about the strategic ones. The strategic one, as I mentioned before, we require sort of one of the business unit GMs to sponsor and say, this is important, we see value in it. And just like what I said, those kind of deals can take a long time just because the GMs are focused at that time on executing towards their business, right? An investment may be viewed as important, but it's not life-changing or altering for the business unit itself. It's a nice to have. So that means the amount of time and dedication that you will get from them is dependent on what fire that they're trying to put out at any given time. So we do have some of those. It can take slower. It can take longer than usual in those cases. But we also have a $100 million AI fund, which we act more like a traditional institutional investor. In that fund, out of that fund, we are basically looking at startups that are applying AI in verticals like manufacturing, automotive, healthcare, agriculture, and even core AI technologies or technologies that are enablers for AI and machine learning, essentially. We invest in sort of not the seed or concept stage, but there has to be some understanding of product market fit. That's kind of the stage that we typically invest in. And we invest across geographies. We invest in US, Germany, UK, Israel as regions.
Oh, wow. All over. Well, so when you see, however many investments you see, many, what are some of the common attributes of the companies that get you the most excited? Is there something about the founder or what they're doing? What makes for a really successful startup? We'll call it a pitch, but a startup application, so to speak.
I think there are two things, right? If the company is very early, then it is typically the founder and the team. You look for what's, because in the startup's journey, they will pivot. They may have different, you want to know if this team can actually deliver those and can change with the needs of the market and adapt. And that they will be open to looking for feedback. They may not necessarily do it because they have certain beliefs, and that's okay, but they should be open to at least listening and understanding what kind of market trends are happening. In certain areas, it's also about, we may have a thesis where we say, okay, this is an interesting area. We think there's going to be some big potential here. And then we may actively chase, startups that are operating in this space and then pick someone that we think is the best in that domain. And that could be based on a combination of technology and market traction.
Awesome. Okay. Well, so is there a specific portfolio company you can tell us about that you've invested in that you're really excited? Tell us, if you can, what they're doing and what's so great about them?
Too many. Maybe I'll talk about a couple quite different, but both applying computer vision, actually. One is applying sort of machine learning to colonoscopy images. So if you think about, it's a healthcare company that's helping address early detection of colorectal cancer and also another condition called inflammatory bowel disease. So typically when a doctor performs a colonoscopy, they're looking for adenomas or polyps, like the easiest way I think of it is think of it like a pimple or something, a projection from your skin or surface, right? But some of these can be so small that a doctor who's looking through the colonoscopy can potentially miss. So they have to do real time. They detect these adenomas and show it to the physician, so the physician can decide if they want to resect or remove that adenoma or polyp right on the spot. So early detection means colorectal cancer is one of those that can actually be prevented, or early detection can help progress of these adenomas into malignant cells. So that means, it's a high chance of, eliminating or even reducing probability of occurrence. So that's kind of what they're focused on. Very early, very exciting, because the possibilities for them beyond even that in other segments is kind of interesting. Another company completely in a different space, but again, applying computer vision is a company called Drishti. They're applying computer vision in the manufacturing space. So think of what maybe I'm just going to make up an example, like a table fan, right? So there are things that you would assemble, and believe it or not, we think about, especially in this day and age, we think of how a lot of things are automated, but in reality, that's not the case. There's still a lot of work that's done by humans. And what ends up happening is that humans are much better suited for certain activities, even something as simple as screwing a nut or a bolt or something like that. So if you think of kind of the Ford model, right, a part will come to your table, you do 3 things, and that's all you do, and then you move it to the next, and then they do the next thing. So what this does is it enable what they're doing is helping you sort of manage that entire human cycle. They're essentially digitizing that process because they have a camera overhang that can guide you. Like if you missed a step, it'll tell you, oh, you missed a step. And it'll can also be used for training. For instance, if someone does a process really well and fast, they can use those video clips as a way to show how everyone can mimic that. The benefits of this is essentially the more you're able to drive your throughput, that means more products you're able to build, higher you can, higher your revenue because it has a direct impact on your throughput and your revenue, right? The other interesting thing is, let's say there is a product flaw, right? They can actually pull up videos they've created this archive of now this imagery that you can basically say, pull all the images of, product built during this time to this time. So you've essentially created like a search engine, which allows you to find out, okay, what SKUs were manufactured at that window? Maybe that's the batch that has the most flaw. Or you find out that one person, there's a bottleneck. You can go in and say, okay, my average mean time should be this, but it's higher in this area. So essentially helps you tremendously in terms of sort of workforce productivity and such. So very novel and unique application, and actually goes towards supporting humans in the manufacturing floor as opposed to eliminating humans from the manufacturing floor.
That's cool. That's really cool. I love the disparate applications of these advancing technologies, changing everything. Well, G, let's we'll wrap things up with one last question, and just a simple one. Any good reads, podcasts, videos, anything out there that you think is, man, this was a great resource that you'd like to point us to? Anything you recommend we read as we're going to bed at night or listen to?
I'm what's the word? I had too many, but depends on what you're interested in. The way I think about it is I do nonfiction and fiction. I love reading about science fiction because it kind of gives me a glimpse into some of the potential future, and it's fascinating to read and sort of see how people think about how the future evolves. But on the nonfiction side, it largely depends on, sort of my own interests. So it could be anything from learning about, impact of technology on mankind, or it could be, I don't know, even something as like, book on venture capital. I feel like there's still a lot more to learn. So I'll pick up a book on VCs and sort of like founder equity and, things like that, and read about it. So I think it depends on what you're interested. So I'm pretty, I don't like to specifically point to certain resources. I think people will discover their passions when just be open to looking at different things.
Awesome. Well, everybody, let's give G a round of applause. Thanks again, G. Radhakrishnan from Micron Ventures. Thank you for coming to UC Davis, sharing your advice and giving us this hour. So appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks all for joining us.
It was really nice meeting you all.